she's going to speak briefly, and then we're going to mostly questions. And so, again, I'll encourage you to submit some through the chat. So, Joan Trumpauer Mulholland left her home in Arlington, Virginia, to become a freedom rider and civil rights activist at age 19. In the next 4 years, she participated in more than 50 peaceful demonstrations throughout the deep South, and her path crossed with paths of some of the biggest names in the civil rights movement: Stokely Carmichael, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Julian Bond, and the late Congressman John Lewis. And like Congressman Lewis, Joan got in a lot of good trouble. She was disowned by her family, threatened, attacked, shot at, cursed with words no one will even say today. She was arrested 6 times and put in a cell on death row at Parchman Penitentiary in Mississippi. She was nearby when 4 children were killed in a church bombing in Birmingham, and she met with Michael Schwerner on the night before he and 2 other young activists were murdered in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Those murders, as you may know, became the basis for the movie Mississippi Burning. And she was targeted for death by the KKK. To put her contribution in perspective, Congressman John Lewis, Bill Clinton, Harry Belafonte, and just 31 other people have been awarded the Martin Luther King I Am a Man Award for their work for civil rights. And Joan is one of just 4 women to join the other 20 men that have won that award, that have been honored in that way. I'd like to take a moment now to show you a photograph and tell you a little bit about just one day in Joan's good trouble time. It was really hard thinking about what the best way to demonstrate what some of the things she's done, but I want to try here. Did that work, Nancy?
Yes.
Okay. This is Joan sitting at the counter of the Woolworth's lunch counter in Jackson, Mississippi. That's her in the middle with the bun. Just to see her sitting there tells you a lot about how brave she is, but that's only part of the story. Just before the picture was taken, a young African-American man, Memphis Norman, was in the seat that Joan took. He was thrown to the floor, kicked, beaten, and arrested before being taken to the hospital. And weighing in at a strapping 5 feet 1 inches tall, Joan stepped through the crowd and took his seat. And the amount of courage it must have taken to that just astounds me. A few minutes later, Joan and the woman on her left were pulled from their seats, dragged outside by their hair, and dropped outside the restaurant. When she was freed, she returned to her seat again and watched as the man next to her was punched with brass knuckles, burned with cigarettes butts, and the 3 of them all had sugar, salt, ketchup, pepper, and everything else thrown in their eyes and on their heads. They stayed for several hours and only left when the store was closed that day. And the photograph became an iconic image of the civil rights era and has been used even to build models of the counter for a number of museums, civil rights museums, and that's one you see on the photograph. A copy of this photo hangs in Joan's house today, along with the note from the photographer that says, "Like I have told you 100 times, y'all were the bravest people I've ever seen." And I have one more thing that I'd like to show you. It's a trailer from the movie that we talked about in the materials we sent out.
She is, in my mind, one of those heroes that demands respect and acknowledgement. Clearly, she was a lady ahead of her time. She walked through that mob, and they realized, of course, immediately where she stood. She joins Carlina and Annie at the counter, the first white to join the demonstration. And at this, the crowd is just incensed. They become like hornets. They start screaming at her.
she wasn't the outside agitator. She was a white Southerner. She was a white Southern woman. And so for that purpose, she was even more dangerous to the white supremacist power structure. Here's this white Southern woman who's supposed to be protected by the system saying, I don't need this protection and I don't believe in the system. And so that made her incredibly dangerous. And that cell was 50 feet from the death chamber to where we were. As far as the state of Mississippi was concerned, we had committed capital crimes.
We had no doubt we were going to die. Mississippi was known as the deepest of the deep south, the heart of darkness. Somebody was going to die that summer. And it looked like it was us.
Okay, with that, I would like to introduce Joan Trumpauer Mulholland.
Well, good morning.
Morning.
Saying goes, the song Gordon Lightfoot, I'm on my second cup of coffee, but I'm still having a hard time facing the day. But there's still a little bit left in there. Good. Well, I want to say a lot of things. Where do I start? But okay, y'all down in Richmond say, oh, Northern Virginia isn't part of Virginia. It's a separate world. Well, let me tell you, when it came to segregation, the state law was the state law. And Robert E. Lee is my homeboy. Arlington is named for his home. So I think we're pretty Southern. Yeah, and the first integrated school in the public school in the history of Virginia was right here in Arlington. It was Stratford. I had gone there a year or two. And actually I'd gotten a little small letter, one of those little things you sew on your jacket for being in the band. And I gave it to one of the guys who was integrated the school. So don't count us out. Now, we had sit-ins here up in Northern Virginia long before before the 1960 sit-ins started. There were random sit-ins here and there, I know in Kansas and Florida, but we had the sit-in in the library and with the rest up in Alexandria. So I think that's Southern. And I'm proud to be a Southerner. I make no apologies for it. We got the best food in the country. We got good music. We got good looking ladies, well, the exception of me maybe, and handsome guys, good scenery from the ocean to the mountains, right here in Virginia. So nothing to apologize for. My family's from Georgia and Sherman did march. John Lewis wanted to march nonviolently through the South like Sherman marched through Georgia, but some of them Yankees made him take that out of his speech at a march on Washington. But we're good folks. Now on that picture of me at the lunch counter where they're wasting all that sugar on my head like I wasn't sweet enough to begin with, sweet young thing. I think two important things about that picture. One is it's probably the most widely used sit-in photo that's used, and it's the most integrated sit-in because you got Ann Moody Black, me white, and John Salter, whose mama was Scotch-Irish, but he was a Native American tribal member. So we're a very diverse little group sitting there. But more importantly is the photographer, Fred Blackwell, who's still, as far as I know, living just outside of Jackson. And when he had graduated from the same high school as all those kids in the crowd, we'd made the mistake of not realizing that it was exam week at the high school, and the seniors, if they had good grades, could come up to Capitol Street and get something to eat, get their lunch. And no fast food joints yet. That was before fast food joints. And only this was their big opportunity, and they couldn't get their bite to eat because the counter was closed with us sitting there, so they were not happy. And trying to outdo each other and taunting us. But you know how those high school boys are. Some of you all were high school boys, you know. And so Fred came in just about the same age as the demonstrators. He lived in the neighborhood. He'd gone to the same high school, knew a lot of the guys. The guy with a cigarette lived 3 doors down the street from him. So these were his people, and he identified with them. He was the second string photographer. You know, the first string guy had gone to get his film. I think most of us remember film, the ancient history in cameras. He had gone to get his film developed. They sent in this young whippersnapper, Fred Blackwell, who got permission to stand on the lunch counter. Well, he started out identifying with his buddies. After 3 hours of standing on the lunch counter taking pictures, his sympathy shifted from his friends who were being rowdy to the nonviolent demonstrators. He came to support the demonstrators when he saw our Gandhian nonviolence. Well, if that wasn't enough, when the pictures appeared in the newspaper in the evening, a kid at a rival white high school saw the pictures of the violence and his heart was changed. And I say that is the power of the press. We must always remember and honor the power of the press. That picture went worldwide. It was even colorized before they had color photography in the newspapers. That picture was colorized on the front page of the Paris Match, the most powerful newspaper in Europe at the time, like saying the New York Times. So I think that is really a powerful moment. And I thank Fred Blackwell. Okay. Yes?
I was just going to say, Ms. Mulholland, the questions are coming in really fast. May I pose some to you?
Okay, I'll stop going on. And
No, I didn't want to interrupt you. I just wanted you to know everybody's so curious.
Okay, well, let's take the questions.
Excellent. Thank you. When you were 9 or 10 years old, you report first giving some thought to racial inequality. I mean, others of us are playing jump rope and dodgeball.
Well,
And I'm just so curious about what caused that.
Well, down at Grandma's house every summer in Oconee, Oconee, Georgia, not that fancy resort, but this was a company-owned logging town. Dirt road, train track went down the middle of the road. The train was called the Nancy Hanks. Anyone know who Nancy Hanks was? Abraham Lincoln's mama. So we know a Yankee owned that train. Well, my little playmate of every summer, we sort of dared each other to go off down the dirt road that led to the inward town. And that was creepy because folks just saw these 2 little white girls coming down the road and disappeared behind their houses and indoors and things, quit sweeping their yard. And that was bad, creepy enough, but we got to the colored school. Colored was the polite term word. Then black would get you, you know, that was rude, fighting words. Saw at the school for the colored kids, and it was just a 1-room shack. The door was ajar. You could see the pot-bellied stove, no glass or screens in the window, just wooden shutters, no playground equipment or grass in the yard, schoolyard, just a hand pump for water and 1 outhouse. So I'm saying this unisex bathroom thing ain't nothing new. They had it in Oconee back in the 50s. This was before Brown versus Board. Well, I knew out the other end of town was the fanciest building for miles around, a brand new post-World War II brick school for the white kids. Oh, it was grand. It's still the fanciest building, but it's a senior citizens complex. Well, I knew looking at that school, this was not fair. It was not treating people the way we wanted to be treated, like we were taught in Sunday school. And I sort of resolved then, I couldn't have put it in good words, but I knew then that when I had a chance to do something to make the South, didn't care about the Yankees, they could take care of themselves, but I wanted to make the South the best place it could be for all its people. And that's when I made the decision.
Thank
I'm
you.
10 years old.
Thank you. And Ms. Mulholland, I think I heard and saw a little bit in the documentary about that your family didn't really love the activities that you got into as a teenager and young adult. And yet there are many of us who think that something about your family must have really fueled the compassion to join this movement. So I'm curious, did your family ever accept your beliefs or your commitment or your contribution or your bravery? What was it like to be in a family that saw things so differently?
Well, now Mama was from rural Georgia, and she never really supported it, but grandchildren sort of soften your heart, though I did have to remind her about her language around the grandkids sometime. Now, on my father's side, my parents had met in DC when they came looking for those good government jobs and the New Deal jobs. My father's side, my great grandmother had been arrested, chained to the steps with other women at the Iowa State Capitol as a suffragette. And her husband, the country doctor in this little town in Iowa, he thought that new preacher went on too long. So one Sunday he got up and went out and rang the church bell, which was emptied the church. It was also, the fire announcement in the town. And so I think there may be a genetic, he was fined $10 for disturbing divine worship, but he said that preacher never went on like that again. So I think there may be a genetic component to this civil disobedience thing. Also, my daddy, from the town he was from in Southwest Iowa, 700 people then, 700 now, maybe, if it's that much. But the town doctor had a good buddy from his college days in Iowa. Now, this is a pop quiz, folks. His good buddy would show up and throw peanuts out in the yard for a scavenger hunt. He was the hero to every kid in town because, they didn't have fresh produce back then in the early 1900s. That was a seasonal thing. And peanuts, unheard of. This was before planters took over the world. Well, that town doctor's good buddy, who do you think he was that would show up with all these peanuts? Come on, somebody guess.
Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter wasn't back in the early 1900s. That's not the first person to say that. George who? George
Washington Carver.
Carver.
George
Washington Carver.
Washington Carver was the hero to every kid in my daddy's hometown because he brought them peanuts. And so, if he's your childhood hero, before Superman came on the scene, you do not grow up prejudiced. You love those peanuts and you love the man who brought them. So I think that, balanced out my mama's side of the family. Daddy didn't like me being in the movement because he was afraid his darling daughter would get, hurt, if not killed. But he supported our goals all the way, thanks to those peanuts.
Thank you. Ms. Mulholland, at 19, when many of us thought getting out of our discomfort zone was just moving out and living away from home, you became involved with the Freedom Rides from DC, worked with people like Stokely Carmichael.
I took Stokely to Mississippi on the plane. Yeah, I organized that. So I take credit for bringing him to the Deep South.
Will you talk a little bit about that trip to Alabama, New Orleans, and Mississippi?
Well, we didn't go to Alabama. This gets mixed up a lot.
Okay.
We flew, a bunch of the Howard sit-in group that I helped organize. We flew to New Orleans, had a day of orientation there, Then we took the Illinois Central, but not to Chicago, just to Jackson, and got off the train in Jackson, went into one waiting room or the other, I forget which, took a seat, and wouldn't get up and walk out. Captain Ray, move on and move out. Y'all hear me? You gonna do it? You're under arrest. And we were off to the city jail. Now something happened on that that gave me hope for the future. I knew things would work out. And it wouldn't have happened if I'd have been black. But when I went to step down, big old step down from the paddy wagon, and I'm a little short, sweet thing, the police officer took my arm to help me down, saying, we don't want anything to happen to you children. And I knew then that things were going to work out okay. Well, we were in the city jail, went to trial. It was absolutely scripted. Over to the county jail. And the worst part of being in that jail, and it got more and more crowded, of course it was segregated, I went in with the white women, was I was in with all these white Yankees who came down south because they didn't approve of white Southerners. And here I'm the only white Southerner in that jail cell. Oh, and those Yankees, they didn't even know what grits were. I had to teach them how to eat. And it got so crowded, we were down to less than 3 square feet of floor space per prisoner in that cell. So people were sleeping under the bunks. One girl slept curled up in the dripping shower stall every night. And they clearly had to do something because more and more people were coming. So the city did. And they thought about putting us in the cattle barns, but they saved that idea at the county, at the city, at the state fairgrounds. They were going to put us in the cattle barns, but they held off on that until after the rest, when Medgar was killed. They decided to take us up to Parchman, the worst prison in the country, worse than Angola in Louisiana. And they took the prisoners on death row, put them to nicer places in the prison, and put us on the cells in death row. Well, they were just trying to intimidate us as far as I was concerned. I knew their game. I'm a Southerner. And it was roomier and cleaner, and the food was way better than that stuff back in the county jail. Well, I didn't have anything else to do that summer. I had already been accepted at Tougaloo College, which I applied to with the encouragement of the leadership of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Didn't just jump up and do it. I took advice and said yes. And I didn't have anything else to do. So I figured I had free room and board for the summer. That's not a bad deal. And I stayed until the last possible minute to get out, pay the rest of my sentence. It was $3 a day for every day you stayed, off your fine. So I served the sentence and worked off the fine as far as I could. And then I went on out to Tougaloo. And I studied hard, got good grades, caused a little good trouble. And that's it.
Miss Mulholland, you talk about your incarceration like it was an interesting experience, but weren't you in a cell located on death row in Parchman Penitentiary, one of the most notorious prisons in the South?
Yeah, but they weren't going to kill us. They were just trying to frighten us. I knew that.
I see. The documentary indicates that you went back there, as many years later, along with a number of people who were jailed with you. What was that experience like to go back and visit?
Oh, I think it was fun. We started swapping stories like it was old home week, You remember this? You remember that? Oh, they did Frida's fried chicken on the 4th of July. And lemonade. I'd forgotten about the lemonade. Little things like that. they had to hurry us on out, the organizers, because the buses had to leave, and they were running out of time. But we were having a good old time. Most of us. Some people got a little freaked out, but.
Gotcha. So you became, as you said, the first white woman to attend Tougaloo College. I imagine Tougaloo was a target at times for a lot of unrest and activity. Can you share a little bit what life was like there?
Well, it was a small campus, about 500 people. At that point, it was about 10 miles out from Jackson. And at first, some students sort of wondered if I was for real or was I just on my, semester abroad kick. But as one girl who's still friends says, even though she belongs to the opposing sorority, we won't call that one by name, but she said, well, once I saw you studying just as hard as the rest of us in the library every night, I knew you were for real and you were okay. Sometimes in, the line at the cafeteria, a student might reach out and want to see what my hair felt like from behind, and I let them touch my hair and, pretended I didn't know it. I don't think any of them tried to see if the white would rub off, but it was good. I was in the social life and invited to join Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Anybody else out there? So very good. And yeah, the main thing was you had to study. And with the Deltas, there wasn't a whole lot of difference between a sorority meeting and a civil rights group meeting. Good mischief.
So, Ms. Mulholland, will you talk a little bit more about the Woolworth lunch counter sit-in? It is the iconic picture that Stan showed earlier, and also, as you mentioned, Professor John Salter was there, and Moody, Medgar Evers, the president of the NAACP in Mississippi. Can you put us in that time and what happened and the experience for you?
Well, the sit-in was planned out of Medgar's office. Medgar did not come down that day. He stayed in the office answering the phone. He wanted to come down, but folks were saying, you'll be a #1 target. But it started out with 3 Black students, all from Mississippi. They're trying to keep it, keep that image. And along with another white lady who was on the staff at Tougaloo, we were down the street where they had sort of a diversionary picket line. But the picketers got arrested right away. And we called Medgar's office, putting the dime in the phone booth thing. And then it was okay. Now what? Well, we hadn't seen any squad cars or paddy wagons down at Woolworth, so we walked down there, and that's when Memphis was pulled off the stool and kicked so severely that he was bleeding out of every hole in his head and had headaches for the rest of his life. He went from bleeding on the floor at Woolworth's to working for the, I can't think what you call it, Office of Management, overseeing the federal budget for the Smithsonian, the Kennedy Center, some of the space program. He went to, really high up from the floor at Woolworth's. Well, after he was out, there were 2 girls left at the counter, and I started sort of being recognized, and I was advised probably by the college chaplain who was there wearing his clerical collar, white guy, to take Memphis's seat at the stool on the stool between the 2 girls. And then that's when we got pulled off, and Annie and I couldn't make it back to where we were. Other people ended up coming down and joining, but we sat there for a good 3 hours on those stools taking it. And it became, for survival purposes, just sort of an out-of-body experience. Like the real you, your soul or whatever had left the body and was hovering up above like a guardian angel. And I understand that soldiers in combat sometimes have this out-of-body experience. So we took it for 3 hours. The college president, when he got word of things, came down and tried to negotiate with the manager to close the store. And the police would not come in because just the week before, the US Supreme Court had ruled the police could not come in on their own and make arrest of demonstrators. Demonstration was freedom of speech. And I had been involved in 2 of the cases, one from Durham and one from up in the DC area, 2 of the cases that were consolidated for the Supreme Court appeal. And the police outside thought this was so funny that, you know, they couldn't come in. Supreme Court said so. And they could only come in if the manager closed the store, and we refused to leave. Well, the manager wouldn't close. And finally, the college president called the, I think, National Office of Woolworth, and they advised the manager to close. And so then the place was emptied out and we could leave safely. And cars were brought up and took us back to Medgar's office, and the hairdresser across the street took the girls over and cleaned us up, and other women came and helped clean us up, and we got some food and went on back to school. And then there was a mass meeting that night where we were featured.
Wow. Ms. Mulholland, there are a number of questions from people who want to know if you've ever bumped into those people who berated, abused, poured food and liquids on all of you that day. And in the documentary, I think you said something like they were kids who were a product of their environment and tools of the power structure.
Yeah.
And I wondered where that sort of seems beyond kind. And I'm just so curious about that.
Well, they were a product. We're all products of our environment. I grew up under segregation without giving it a thought. My mother grew up under it and believed it was the way things should be. If you're taught by the school, the law, you're supposed to be law-abiding. The law says things should be segregated. But the church, the school, your parents, everything says this is the way it should be. Yeah, that's the way you want it to be. I mean, nations go to war over questions of what's right and what's wrong. So why shouldn't these kids be down there mad? Furthermore, they couldn't get lunch on their big go out for lunch occasion. So, yeah, I could see where they'd be, well, pissed off, to put it politely, sort of.
Thank you. I'm going to bring you a little bit to the questions on today's world. Janine asks, Joan, what do you say to white people today who are finally becoming aware, but who, plagued with guilt, fear, and habit, see a need for something different, but may declare they can't change?
They can't change the world, or they can't change themselves.
Themselves.
Well, you got to just take it one step at a time. Just do something different one day, and maybe next week do something else different. But just chip away at your old self. It's just like a marriage or a boyfriend that you break up with. You got to deal with your feelings one day at a time, and try to find somebody else who agrees with you and thinks things should change, and be friends with them and let them help you work it out.
Right.
My mama could learn to curb her tongue a little bit because of the grandkids, so we can all do something.
Mhm. So I think when we hear your story, as BK has noted as well, is that it's a bit different to think about you being willing to die for what you thought was right, and didn't go along to get along. That's amazing. You know, I can't help but note that it's hard for me not to think of parallels between you and the diminutive, purposeful, determined Supreme Court Justice we just lost on Friday. And one of the great quotes of Ruth Bader Ginsburg was, "Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." So I think you've also done that, and any lessons there for us, we'd really appreciate.
Well, I'm honored to be even vaguely compared to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And her first name at birth was Joan, too. So I feel a special connection that I just found out about.
Oh, wow.
But her mama, she got called Ruth in school because Joan was the name of the year. And too many Joans. Yeah, I know that feeling.
Great. Joan, I'm going to let you have the last word, but first I'm going to just take a moment to go to BK, if you don't mind, BK, to tell us a little bit about the foundation that you're on the board of,
Well,
and what it does. I'm sorry, Joan.
I got nothing to do with it except that boy of mine put my name on it without asking permission. You know how kids are. But I'm for it. You know, I support it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. And I'll be brief. I mean, first of all, just so glad that you are hosting Joan today. Clearly, she is a national treasure. Freedom is not free. And too many people go along to get along. And people that know better have to stand up. We've got a big election coming up, and people need to vote their dreams and not their fears. The foundation attempts to end racism through education. And so we've produced this wonderful guidebook for educators. As you heard Loki mention, there are a number of award-winning films that we make a part of the package and make available to schools. And I'll put a link in the chat box where you can go and donate to the foundation. It's fully tax deductible, and that will give you an opportunity to help us to promote this program. We can change people's hearts through education. Even in the most vile of people, there is at least one chord of decency. And if we can strike that chord with truth, it will sound in justice and righteousness. We know what's the right thing to do. All of us together can deliver to our children the civil society that they deserve. Joan fought for that, was willing to give her life for that. Thank God she's still with us and can give us and share the lessons from her journey. And we have to pick up the baton and carry it forward. That's why I joined the foundation. That's why I happily contribute my time, my treasures, my talents to helping this woman to carry the dream forward.
Thank you so much, BK. Joan, your whole life has been an inspiration for us, and I know that many folks are going to go to the documentary if they haven't seen it and really watch a full-blown set of stories that just take your breath away and inspire us for today's moment. Any parting words you have for us?
Vote.
Perfect parting word. Thank you.
For us to have the right to vote, and that your vote, just that one vote, does make a difference.
Thank you. Stan, may I turn it over back to you?
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Ms. Mulholland. That was wonderful. We really appreciate it, and maybe we'll have you back sometime to tell us about more things you've seen. One thing I'd like to mention, it's interesting that BK was here. That was a coincidence in the small world department. When I talked to Loki the first time, he had no idea that where I was calling from or anything, and we found out only later that we had a new board member for the organization from Richmond. So was pleased at that. I would encourage everybody to watch the video that we put links to, and An Ordinary Hero. It's on Primetime, Amazon Prime. I mean, it's also there's a shorter version that's on Vimeo that you can find through searching. It's an hour and a half, and it's a great film about the Freedom Riders and about Joan in particular, obviously. I thank you all for coming. October 27th is our next meeting, and that's just 7 days before the election. So it was perfect that Joan mentioned voting. We encourage you to, and be prepared if you come to the next meeting. We may do a poll and ask you if you've already voted yet. So I hope we'll get lots of yeses from that. So I am again pleased to have this meeting and look forward to getting together with everybody again soon. And Ms. Mulholland, I look forward to talking to you again in the future. Thank you so much for everything you have done and for everything you're still doing. And with that, I will say goodbye, and we'll see you on October 27th.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.